You know, one of the reasons that I make these videos is, of course, for my own enjoyment. In other words, I can go down the lake and I can catch fish like this one here. I can catch them many times I want to. Sitting around the house, can't get out or whatever, for whatever reason, you know, fish a little bit. I'll pull up one of these. I can catch them over and over and over as many times as I want to. Be quiet there, boy. The dog's wanting out. Uh, but anyways, yeah, like I said, I make them so I can enjoy them. But a primary purpose in making these things is to try to encourage anybody that might happen to be watching one of them to learn how to spoon plug, or that's a word that Buck Perry, who's the father of modern fishing, all modern fishing, of course, most fishermen don't even know who he is, never heard of him. But Buck Perry is the guy who just made the basic discoveries that totally revolutionized fishing. And Buck died a few years ago, but he had an instructor, one of his main instructors, a man named Don Dixon. And Don teaches Buck's full method, Buck's full school of fishing. And if you really want to, if you're really interested in fishing, you want to catch fish, you don't want to go out there and stammer around trying to figure out, well, what does he want, this color, that color, and that sort of thing. But you want to be successful virtually every time you go fishing. Now, if you start spoon plugging, if you start following Buck Perry's system, it is a logical, orderly system that you go about locating the fish. Every time you go to the lake, you use the same techniques. You've got a system that you follow until you actually find the fish. And most fishermen, they just stammer around blindly trying this, that, or the other with no real rhyme or reason to what they're doing. Well, Buck was a physics professor, very logical thinking. He had an IQ of 200, and he figured fish out. And he put all that in print, and you can buy that. You can buy his book. You can buy his Buck Perry's Full School of Fishing. And you get that from buckspoonplugs.com. You can order that from Scott Jenkins, who now owns buckspoonplugs.com. And you can, I would strongly suggest that you go and you purchase that printed material so you can study it over and over and over and over and over until you get it. It's simple as falling off a log, but you got to know it. You got to know where you're going, know what you're doing, have a logical system where you can go and locate these fish as in the shortest possible period of time. Now, like these fish that I've caught here, you catch them on the troll. I caught them on the troll, and there might be a school there. So when I catch them on the troll, I will go back and cast that immediate area because there might be a heck of a school there. And at times you can go back and locate a school, and you can go back in there and cast after cast after cast. You'll catch fish. And sometimes it's just stragglers, like these were. These first fish here were. They were not, they didn't have a big school with them. They're just scattered out. They're scattered up and down the bank here and there. And if you don't know Buck Perry's spoon plugging system, you're going to have a hard time catching fish. A very hard time catching fish. Actually, most of the time. But particularly on the day when the fish have not moved, or as people like to say, they're not biting today. Well, they bite every day if you just know where it is they're biting. Most of the time you're fishing, the average fisherman's fishing where there are no fish. They're in the wrong section of the lake, they're in the wrong section of the shoreline, they're on the wrong structures, they're fishing in the wrong manner because basically they're following their heroes on these these pros, the professionals, you know, that get out and have these shows on television, you know, where they wear all the fancy clothes and all the patches and all that stuff to show you what a great fisherman they are. Well, actually, all they're doing is trying to sell you equipment. That's all they're doing. Some of them may even really know how to go about catching fish in a logical system, orderly system, but I highly doubt it. Precious few of them do. And most all the tournaments are set up, they follow the spawn when the fish should be shallow. And they follow the spawn from Florida to Canada. And once the spawn's over, most of the pro tournaments are over. Because the easy fishing's over. Well, as Buck says, and you will find if you study his books or if you do yourself a favor and go to Don Dixon Fishing on YouTube, Don Dixon teaches Buck Perry's School of Fishing. It's possible for you as a fisherman to sit on your couch drinking a beer and learn how to catch fish. Learn how to catch any kind of fish anywhere in the world, any time of the year. So if you find that you find yourself getting a little tired of just fishing and you'd really like to do a little more catching, I strongly suggest you go to Don Dixon Fishing on YouTube, where you can learn Buck Perry's system of how to systematically go about finding fish. I mean, there is a logical system, a logical order whereby you can go about finding the fish. And to get the printed material that Don teaches, you can go to buckspoonplugs.com and you can buy them. You can get the printed material there. Plus, you can get the rods and the line and, of course, the spoon plugs, the stuff that you really need to implement the system. But, you know, Buck had a lot of things, a lot of little sayings that he said that it made, that, you know, on the surface it sounds funny, but it's actually the honest to John's truth. He said, when you go to a body of water, a lake or something, a lake you've never been to or anything else, when you drive up and you look at that body of water, you know exactly where those fish are at, because there's only 3 places on earth that they can possibly be. People look kind of funny when he says things like that, but it's the absolute truth. But it sounds funny when he says it, because there's only 3 places they can possibly be. They can either be shallow, deep, or somewhere in between. Now that sounds crazy, but you stop and think about it a minute. That's the only 3 places they can be. Either they are shallow, or they're deep, or they're somewhere in between. Now when you go down fishing, and the fish are not biting, as everybody says, you can bet your bottom dollar they're not shallow. They're not shallow, because virtually every fisherman on the lake is fishing shallow water, just like I am right here in these videos. But I'm doing it with purpose. I've got a reason. I know why I'm up here doing this. But if you go in, the vast majority of the fishermen, pros and all, they're fishing in shallow water. And they spend, like Buck says, another thing says that even a good lake, the best lake you could ever find, only about 2% of the water ever contains a fish. Now you stop and think about that a minute. You look at all that vast amount of water out there and realize that only about 2% of the water ever has a fish in it. So what you want to do is spend 100% of your time in that 2% of the water that at least 90% of the fish are spending all their time. So if you're fishing in that other 98% of the water, which most fishermen are most of the time, that contains no fish, what in the world is your chances of catching something? But if you're just going out there stammering around, fishing in the 2% of the water that contains the vast majority of the fish, you're going to have a measure of success. Now, can you imagine yourself going about that in a logical manner? So it's all simple and it all can be learned. Anybody can learn it. Anybody can learn to become a good fisherman. A good fisherman. So people ask me, say, do you think you're a good fisherman? Absolutely. I know I am. I don't think I am. I know I am. When I go fishing, I don't wonder, am I going to catch fish? My only question is how many and when. Now, sometimes its conditions are so bad that I can go out and I spend up 10 hours and not make a catch. That happens. But I've got all the confidence in the world that if anybody on that lake's going to catch fish on that day, I'm going to be one of them. But it's not because of anything that I've done other than one thing. Buck Perry was a genius. He figured this stuff out. And he put it down on printed page. He taught it in schools. He had an IQ of 200. I don't have an IQ of 200. I don't know what my IQ is. I've never had it tested. There may not be one go that low. I don't know. But anyway, I don't know what my IQ is, but I do know it's high enough that I've got enough sense that if somebody figured out how to consistently catch fish, and he's willing to show me, surely to God, I got enough sense to pay attention and learn it. But you'd be amazed at how few people will learn. They say, well, I ain't got time for that. They don't have time to do a little study to find out how to catch fish, but they got all the time in the world to go to the lake time after time after time and come back with little to no success. But they can't take the time to learn how to catch fish. Yeah, you got to learn it, because what catches fish is knowledge. Knowledge is the key to catching fish, period. And that knowledge can be learned. It's taught by Don Dixon. There's a couple other people on YouTube that's sort of like me. They might try to give you bits and pieces of it here and there. But Don has got the whole school, the whole system down in logical order. So for heaven's sake, do yourself a favor. Go to YouTube, go to Don Dixon Fishing. And don't just start at pick up anywhere. Scroll all the way back to the beginning of his channel and start there and work your way forward. If you just start up here in the end or the middle of somewhere, you're just going to get confused. You got to start at the beginning. But if you will learn Don Dixon, what he's teaching you, Buck Perry's system, you will do just like Buck. Buck himself, here's another one of Buck's sayings. Buck says that if you start spoon plugging, and spoon plugging meaning a system of fish, not necessarily a particular lure, but a system of fish, a orderly system. The orderly elimination of the unproductive, or the 98% of the water that contains no fish. You want to get rid of that so you can spend your time in that 2% of the water that contains all the fish. So you want to learn, as Buck says that, if you follow his stuff, if you follow this teaching, you're going to catch more fish than you thought was in the water. By golly, he's right. I mean, you're going to catch fish like you've never dreamed about catching fish before. If you've got the capabilities of studying and learning something and then applying it, you will catch more fish than you ever thought was in the water. And another thing he said, when you start doing this and following this stuff, you need to buy yourself the biggest net you can find, because you're going to need it. He's right there too. Now, if you look in the net that I'm using in this boat, it's not the biggest net I could find. I've got one. But I sort of learned that I can take this little net and kind of stuff a big fish in it, and it don't take up quite so much room because my boat's a little boat. So every inch counts. So I've got a reasonable net, but I do not find the biggest net. I do not have the biggest net I can find, but I did carry it for many years, and I needed it. And a lot of times I find I can't hardly stuff a fish in this net. But another thing he said, you better develop a thick skin. Because when you get back to the ranch, when you get back to the dock, and people ask you what kind of luck you had that day, and you tell them, you know what they're going to say? They're going to call you the biggest liar in the country. So you better develop a thick skin, because people are just simply not going to believe you. And it's amazing how people just simply will not believe the truth. I mean, you tell them the truth. You're not exaggerating at all. Let me give you, for instance, I came up to the boat ramp, And there's a fellow there that's just me and this one other fellow, and he's got a local fishing show, a show that teach you how to catch fish. Okay, so we come up to the dock or to the ramp, and he said, "You have any luck today?" And I said, "I caught 31. It's kind of slow." And he said, "You caught what?" And I said, I caught 31. And he said, "Well, what was you fishing for?" I said, "Bass." He said, "You caught 31 bass?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I threw that mud bug all day long, and I didn't catch anything." My goodness, he had a favorite lure that at times no doubt produced. So he goes to the lake and he throws that same plug all day long. It didn't catch anything, and he just kept on doing what he was doing and didn't catch anything. I, on the other hand, was straining the water. I'm straining, 2 foot, 6 foot, 9 foot, 10 foot, 12 foot, 15 foot, 20 foot, 25 foot. I'm straining the water trying to find the fish and using different speeds to try to evoke a strike out of the fish. And on that particular day, I found most of the fish hanging around 5 to 10 feet of water, and then it took a fast retrieve to get them. So I was roaring that spoon plug down the bank, and I caught 31 fish. And he said, "Well, what'd you catch them on?" And I said, "Spoon plug." I said, "You know what that is?" "Yeah, I know what one is." And I said, "Well, let me show you one." He looked at it and he said, "I ain't never seen nothing like that in my life," which didn't surprise me a bit. Anyway, he said, "Well, how was you fishing it?" I said, "I was trolling it." And he said, well, I don't troll." Well, he also didn't catch any fish, okay? That ought to tell him something, but evidently it didn't. So, trolling plays an extraordinarily important part in successful fishing. But a lot of people, some people may have heard of spoon plugging, and they just automatically think that that's just trolling. Well, it's not. But trolling, my goodness, how much water, let's say in miles, how much water, and we're going out there on we're going to fish 10 hours today. And you're going to fish, you're going to cast. How much water can you effectively expect to cover in 10 hours, in miles? Well, most people come up, and they're probably right. So they could probably cover somewhere around 1.5 miles. That's stretching it. I'm talking about 1.5 miles. You fishing 1.5 miles of water. That's a lot of that's a lot of water. And that's about how much the average caster can cover. Some of them might be able to cover a little more than that, whatever, but it's going to be a fairly small amount of water. But if I'm out there and I'm going to be fishing, trolling 10 hours, and during the warmer part of the year, an average speed is 5 to 6 miles an hour. But let's just take the lesser of the two. Let's just say 5 miles an hour. And I'm fishing 10 hours. How many miles of water do you think I've covered that day? I've covered 50 miles of water. Common sense will tell you, my lure is exposed to a lot more fish than yours is if you're only casting. It's just common sense. It's just logic. It took a genius to figure that out, Buck Perry, but it's just common sense. So, trolling does play an extraordinarily important part. And the main thing it's the quickest way in the world that you can locate the fish. And generally speaking, once you've located that fish, say you're trolling a section of bank and you catch a fish going one direction, you got 30 yards of line behind you, okay, and running a certain size spoon plug. Well, you turn around and you go back the opposite direction, you run the same amount of line at the same speed with the same plug, and you catch another fish. Okay, common sense to you, there might be a school there, and halfway between. And let me point out something else you should have done. When you're trolling, keep your marker buoy handy. And when you catch that fish, you immediately throw a marker buoy overboard. Then you go down, you turn around, you come back up the other way, same amount of line out, same speed, same plug. You catch another fish, you throw another marker buoy out. Then you pull out away from the bank and you got a marker buoy here and a marker buoy there. Common sense would tell you if there's a school there, it's halfway between those two marker buoys. Then you reach over there and you got your casting plug with the same size spoon plug on it that you caught those things on. You move there and you throw right up in there where that school should be. If there's one there, most of the time, you will catch them on the cast. And when you find a tightly school of fish and you're casting to them, you can catch one after another, after another, after another. But there are times, and I've got videos, and some of them I posted last spring, that when depth and speed control is so critical, that on the cast you just can't quite exactly match that depth and speed that you're using on that boat. Sometimes depth, remember the two things that catches fish is depth and speed. You have to have your number one thing is your lure has got to be at the exact same depth that the fish is. Then if you move it by it at a right speed, you'll invoke an involuntary action out of him. He'll hit that lure in spite of himself. So, but there are times when that depth and speed is extraordinarily critical. And several times last year, several days in a row, I went to the lake, and I mean, speed and depth control were unbelievably critical. I could locate a school. I could even see them on my depth finders. I could see them, I mean, big schools. And I'd sit there and I could cast and cast and cast and do everything I could to try to replicate what I was doing trolling. And I couldn't catch anything. Not one fish. And like I said, I've got videos. You can go back to last spring and look at some of the videos, you will see many times that I had schools of fish located. I absolutely could not catch one. But I could turn right around and I'd go right back to the cast and I could catch one going up the lake and down the lake, up in the lake and down the lake. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. Then you'd stop and cast to that same school again, nothing. Nothing, casting, nothing. And as soon as you go back to the troll, bang, you got them. So, but what you can do on the troll, I mean, you know, you let out this amount of line with this size plug going at this speed. And today with your depth finders and all that stuff that's got your speed on there that you can see how fast you're going. So you can put out the exact same amount of line each time using the exact same plug going at the exact same speed. So you are positively replicating each pass what has been productive. But when you go to the cast, you can't quite match that. Thank goodness, most of the time, depth and speed is not that critical. I mean, it's usually a speed factor. It's not that critical that you can go back on a cast and you can catch them. But there are times that you can't. You just got, you've got to be able to replicate whatever it is that's catching the fish, and that'll be depth and speed. And of course, you've got to keep your lure in the right position. Then we get into kind of a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I'll go back to what Buck said. This is not what I said. Buck said, I didn't like those words when I heard them at all. Buck said, the day you purchase a bass boat's the day you'll put a limit on how good a fisherman you'll ever be. Oh boy, I didn't want to hear that, because bass boats were really just coming on the scene. Boy, I like those things. They were pretty. They were comfortable. They were nice. So I wanted one. I said, well, I know Buck's been right about everything else, but nah, he can't be right about this. I can make that bass boat work. So I got me a bass boat. I fished, meaning I cast my rear end off that whole year. Virtually that whole year. My fish catch went to the basement. It was pitiful. So I thought, well, it's not bass boats in general, it's that bass boat. So I get me another. And I pretty much kept a fledgling boat dealer in business. I think I got him established, I really do, because it seemed like every time I turned around, I'd get in a new bass boat. And of course, it didn't matter which bass boat I had. My fish catch stayed just exactly like Buck said it was going to. So I thought, okay, if I can't buy one, by golly, I'll build one. And I took the better part of all winter long, and I built me a boat. I built me a bass boat. I built me a bass boat that was going to do what I wanted it to do. And I will say one thing, it was beautiful. I mean, it was unbelievably beautiful. You know what? It wasn't worth the flip. It was pretty to look at, but it sure wasn't any good to catch fish out of. It was, and still, even by the fact that it was an incredibly beautiful boat, prettier than anything I said at that time anyway that the factory put out. Since then, the factories got really good, and they're putting out some mighty pretty boats. They're pretty to look at, and I'll go down to Bass Pro and I won't buy and look at them and look at the prices on them and just shake my head and keep on trucking. Because anyway, I took this bass boat that I'd built, and I went back down to the dealer, and from that dealer, and you got to remember, my God, man, this was back in the early 70s, just in chrome fixtures on that boat, needing rod holders and mooring cleats and things like that. I had $1,800 worth of chrome on that boat. This is back in the early 70s, just in chrome. I had a fortune in that boat. So I go down to the dealer and I said, I went around back, and he had a Alumacraft F9 Lake Master. He had a 14 and 16 foot. And having learned my lesson, what Buck said, I would like to have gotten the 16 footer, but man, I've been bit, you know, so I ain't taking any chances. So I went for the 14 footer. So I went around and asked the guy on it, and I said, how will you trade this bass boat of mine that I built for that 14-foot Alumacraft F9 Lake Master? He said, well, I can't trade with you. I said, well, you own this outfit. You can do anything you want to. I said, just say you did trade, how would you trade? He said, well, the only way I could trade is trade even. I said, fill out the paperwork. And he looked at me like I just got off the ship. I said, fill out the paperwork. So I took that little $600 boat. The boat's cost $650. Brand new, $650 boat. And I traded that multi-$1,000 bass boat that I'd spent all winter building. I traded it to him, and I went home and I stripped the bench seats out of it and built the thing back like I wanted it in a half a day. In a half a day, I had my little Alumacraft boat back on the water with a little 25-horse Evinrude on it. By golly, I went back to fishing. I went back to catching fish. Oh, I was as happy as a pig eating slop. I was finally back to catching fish. And Buck was right. A bass boat, and that's big business now. Bass fishing and fishing in general is a huge business. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. And all these TV shows sponsored by all these people and all this stuff, what do you think they're doing? They're trying to sell you boats and fishing equipment. They're not trying to tell you how to catch fish, but they've got you convinced that you've got to have all this stuff. And now when I go to the lake, and I'm in what the little boat you see right here, it's not that 14-footer because somebody stole that one from me. That's a long story. But anyway, this is a 16-foot Alumacraft John boat. It's a perfect fishing boat. And like Buck said, a John boat's the ideal boat. It's the most perfect boat you can get for all-around fishing. And I'm happy as a lark out there fishing in this thing. But these big big old fancy bass boats. They're beautiful, and they're all that stuff. They ride good, and they're everything else. But all in the world they are is nothing but an expensive floating casting platform. That's all they are. That's all they are. Now, but they are that. They're a great floating casting platform, but that's all they are. You cannot precision troll with one. You can't. Now, you people are going to say, oh yeah, I can do it. They think trolling is throwing a lure behind the boat and dragging it around. That's not trolling. I'm talking about precision trolling. If you want to learn that, you go to Don Dixon and he'll show you. He'll show you what trolling is. Or go to get the printed page from Buck and he'll tell you what trolling is. He'll show you what precision trolling is. Basically, precision trolling is being able to hit a certain mark under the water behind the boat. So any boat that's a big old cumbersome heavy boat that you cannot handle on a dime will not make a decent trolling boat. You have to be able to handle that boat on a dime instantly. So that means a small, highly maneuverable boat. So if you want to stay with the bass boat, that's perfectly fine. But you've got to realize that Buck was absolutely correct when he said your fish catch will be extremely limited. Extremely limited. Now, why do you think that the tournaments outlaw or don't allow trolling? Because if they did, they could not sell those big old fancy cumbersome bass boats and all that equipment. They couldn't do it. If they allowed trolling, somebody like me come along with a little old John boat, one rod and one plug, is going to win an enormous number of those tournaments, simply because what we discussed before. The guy in a little boat fishing like this can cover more water. And if he covers more water, chances are mathematically he's going to win some tournaments. And boy, that ain't going to look good. Because not a whole lot of money to be made in selling little boats, little motors, and one rod and reel. Not a lot of money in that. So they've got to be able to sell you big, expensive boats and all that stuff. And that's why trolling is, it's not because of any crazy cheating or anything like that they think of. No, it's effective. It's too effective. It's so effective they cannot allow it, period. And we'll get into that in another video talking about why trolling is outlawed in tournaments. But for the meantime, go to Don Dixon Fishing, learn how you can catch any kind of fish anywhere in the world on a very consistent basis. Do yourself a favor and do that. We'll talk soon.